Makes it easier, I suppose. Hey, you gotta put an end to that. Memento, not proof this time. Tenjo, yeah, he said it back in episode 1, right? That was so chaotic. Just so much fun, man, really. Actually ran down to 0 this time. Or they let it run down to 0. That's right, Amane Suzuha. You know exactly what that is. Or what that means. That's the critter, as Ocarine called her, I suppose, a couple of episodes ago, right? Ah. Look at this. The many worlds interpretation kind of takes care of that. Go on then. Oh, the anticipation. I mean... Yeah, Celeb 17. This guy, man. That's right. That's right, the messages did stop all of a sudden. This guy's the best. Hey, ethical Ocarine. That too. Too much attention. This guy's the best. Yeah, the reflections in the CRT, it's a great use of it, isn't it? Because usually you see reflections in the water, in glass, in a mirror. But here, reflected in the darkness of the CRT screen. He's including her. Lotto numbers. Could this be enough? Finally. Look at that. This is it. Are lotto numbers significant enough? I asked the question in the last episode. Not if you just shift to an entirely different timeline. Oh wow, this is quite the build-up. Kangaroo. Oh my god, it happened. It happened. Ah, those numbers again. 0.57, da 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 da. Holy shit, it happened. I just got chills, man. Mayuri, of course. Snaps him out of it, as always. Okay. So he's zoned out from their perspective, I suppose. Oh. Wow. Yeah, that's right, Ocarine. This happened before. That wasn't 7 days, though. That's like... Slip 7. 17. See, the second time it's happening now, it's going to really do a number on him. Hey, Ruka. Oh, whoa. Oh, yes.
1218同じだ。ルカ子、お前これをどこで？
Ah.
さんに数字を教えてもらって、
俺が？
当たるかもしれない数字だから買ってみろって。
いつ
1週間前です。ああ、オカリンは予知能力者だね。
I'll have to look at those dates again.
ロト6当てたん？
番号を一つ
Ah, did you know? 2, 12, 18, 2, 12, 19.
押しすぐる。
岡部、あんた
Yes, Maki-say. She put it together immediately.
毒ペがないではないか。
なかったものはなかったんだから仕方ないでしょ。
Oh my god. Oh, the sound design there, the echo, the butterfly effect.
しかし送信履歴がない。
Yeah.
書き換えられたということか。
No, you just shifted to another timeline.
一緒に話し合い、一緒に見ていたはずなのに、俺だけが覚えている。俺
The exemption.
この感覚、あの時
Just like then. Oh, chills. Oh, look at that. Cuts an isolated, lonely figure. Cuts another isolated, lonely figure.
それ何？大切なもの。
Ooh, this should be interesting.
どうした？洗脳されたような顔してる。
I mean...
そうかもしれない。洗脳されたのは俺の方か。
Or they have.
なんだ？
チップは入って
Ah.
大丈夫。洗脳されていない。
So that's a thing from
チップ。
Suzaha's future.
ど
Oh, wow. That really carries. A perverted gentleman.
聞こえてくるって言ったでしょ。
これほどまでとは。もしかしてお前、タイムマシンの話も。
やるね、かな。
中国
So casual.
分かってるって誰にも言わないから。ひょっとしてタイムマシンのことで悩んでるとか？だったらさ、ジョン・タイターに聞いてみた。
Of course.
タイターは言っていた。過去へ行き、そこで過去を変えると。
The divergence number, that's right.
数値が変動し、世界は別の世界線に移動する。その移動の時、変化が生じる以前の世界
Reconstructed.
線での記憶は消去され、
Yet,
新たな世界線での記憶が再構築されると。 D メールにより、ルカ子がロト6を買わなかった世界線から買った世界線へと移動した。
that's the butterfly effect in effect.
過去の流れも変わったのだ。
Wow, that's beautiful.
ロト6を当てるための D メールを過去に送らなかった世界、マユリたちは覚えていないのではない。
Never happened.
実験そのものが
Almost got to that point. Almost.
ではなぜ俺にだけその記憶がある？
That's the big question, man.
応援してるからね。
おお、
Oh, yeah. Bro, ask her to join the lab already. Oh, shit. The 42 inch is still in pieces. So Suzaha actually is quite proficient with the CRTs. Oh, yes, look at that. Isn't that interesting?
事情は後で話す。今日の実験は中止だ。みんな解散してくれ。
オカリン。
Yeah, she felt that it's off. Or Okarin's off.
で、
Mayuri's
そこ
different.
の助手、お前は帰らないのか？
ちょっと考え事。
Interesting. Oh,
どうしてもここにいたいのならば、邪魔をせず静かにしているのだな、ザ・ゾンビ。
it's a zombie. This is beautiful stuff. Look at that. Him being boxed in. Ah.
恋する乙女が好きな相手からのメールを待ってるみたい。
そんなに構ってほしいのか？
Could be a bit of that, but there's a bit
メールの
more.
相手誰なの？
She understands that something happened here.
でね、オカリン、元気になった？まだだったらマユシーのウーパーをむぎゅーってしてもいいからね。そしたら元気出るから。
ああ、もう起きるぞ。
Look at that. His mood just completely changed.
ありがとう。じゃあね。岡部、にやけ。
Yes, he is. Most intriguing. Okay,
メ
then.
ールを読みました。あなたの推測通り、
Look at this. Official confirmation for Okarin. But... Huh.
事実
Interesting.
以前にも同じようなことがありました。どういうことでしょう？
I thought Teeter already knew about this. Kind of.
私がいた2036年においても想定されていなかった事象です。しかし世界線を越えて記憶を維持し、その変動を観測できる人間など今までに確認されたことはありません。
To observe the changes cuts to Moeka.
今日あなたにはその力があるのかもしれません。
Ability, interesting term.
あなたならば世界を導くことができるかもしれません。ダイバージェンス 1% の向こう側へ。
1%.
世界を導くだと。
Yeah, I used to roleplay about this all the
向
time.
こう側とはそこに一体
Yeah,
何があるというのです
do
か？
explain. Oh, look at that. It's actually a really cool
その
phone.
先にあるのは真の自由です。その壁を越えなければ未来はディストピア。
Ah.
私の目的は未来を変えること。そしてその力を持っているのはあなたかもしれない。
The chosen one, if you will.
どうしたの？
俺が未来をそんなこと。
Isn't it?
今日はあなたに救世主になってほしい。
That is quite the request. And so it begins. Yeah, this is a significant episode. Bit by bit, over the span of the last few episodes, the stakes have been escalating, right? In the last episode, I discussed this idea of it already kind of feeling like there's no turning back if you look at it from Okarin's perspective, right? That maybe it's already too late. Given the things that have been set into motion already. But here in this episode, you see that truly it's a slippery slope, or Okarin rather is on a slippery slope. Again, my expectation from this point on is that episode by episode, things are going to escalate. The stakes are going to escalate to the point that, I don't know, man, sooner or later, there's going to be a definitive type moment, right? Perhaps a catastrophic moment. Catastrophic in the sense that, a change, speaking of changes, the butterfly effect, it's in full flow, right? Maybe again in the beginning stages of it, but there's certain changes that are now hinting towards, okay, sooner or later, the connotations, the outcome, the results of these butterfly effect moments, they are going to become quite substantial. Right? That's how I'm looking at it. And, that's the reason I've been talking about this idea of, appreciating the good times, appreciating these times, because they're not going to last. It is a time travel narrative, and things are going to become quite tense, right? Things are going to become quite, unbearable for someone like Okarin. And even the people that are attached to Okarin, right? Close friends, people like Mayuri. I spoke of Mayuri's emotional intelligence in the last episode. She sees things that a lot of these others are not really able to see, or, they're not really caught up in all of that, or rather they're caught up in, their thing, and their thing being, again, science and that whole aspect of it, computers and hacking and all of that, they're not really at all in tune with some of the other stuff, right? At least not from, a moment-to-moment basis. But Mayuri is different. And that's been the case. That's been clear since day one. Mayuri already notices the change in Okarin. She knows something is off about Okarin now, right? And, there's a significant moment, definitive moment, as Okarin tells, or he asks all of them to leave for now, or for the day, right? From the lab. And, the camera cuts to Mayuri, who is rather concerned. She can just tell, you can see, right? That she can feel it, that, okay, something's off about Okarin. Okarin is behaving in a different manner, right? Perhaps things are a little bit different about the Okarin she knows. So Mayuri can already tell, right? That Okarin is kind of going through something here. And yeah, let's see how that kind of plays out. And, in comparison to Mayuri, the others, yeah, of course, at first, they'll think that Okarin's being a little bit, I don't know, strange or something's off about him for a little bit, but then they kind of move on, right? They kind of chalk it up to, okay, that's just Ocarine being Ocarine, perhaps, right? Though again, there is a little bit of concern. I'm not saying there's no concern at all. I mean, before I go any further, let's kind of, talk on it real quick. It happened. It finally happened. He finally shifted world lines. He's in a different timeline, right? I've been asking about this. I've been speculating and discussing, and the nature of the D-mails they've been sending, and those D-mails not being enough, right? To actually make him jump again to a different timeline. It finally happened, and that's a big moment. Big moment, because now, it truly felt like it's kicking it all off. That he is on that slippery slope, and it could escalate, and it could just kind of, snowball into like a free fall, right? To the point that, he might find himself so far removed. Again, I'm thinking long term. As many of you know, that's just how my thought process functions. I'm always kind of thinking about, end game and the long game connotations of things. I can live moment to moment as well in any story, in any narrative, but that's just how I function. That's how I've consumed storytelling for a long time. It's just not something I can turn off. But again, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves here. But I am looking at the end point, if there's an end point to this slippery slope, right? Sooner or later, Ocarine might find himself just completely removed from his own reality, his own perception of reality, right? Again, as this outlier, right? As someone who's been requested to be a savior. How about that? That's just, my goodness, that's tremendous, immense pressure, right? Just the idea of that is baffling to both, Ocarine and I. And then, of course, it can branch off into so many different possibilities. Much like the timeline aspect of it, branching off and all of that, and of course, I'll touch up on that aspect of it as well. John Teeter specifically asking Ocarine to be the savior, right? Because this gift of his, right? Again, it's all a matter of perspective, because that gift can just as easily be a curse. At some point, I'm sure Ocarine is going to be just so fed up, just so annoyed. Again, annoyed is an understatement, but he is going to feel like it's a curse at some point, right? Almost as if you're the last man standing, the last man on the planet, right? Yes, even though these timeline changes happen, you see that slowly, and again through, the visual storytelling as well, you see that he cuts an isolated figure, right? Even if there is someone around him, one of the standout moments, and the composition of this moment as well, or some of the actual shots from the scene, him in the lab, right? And it's dawn and the lights coming in. I mean, aesthetically speaking, it's beautiful. The whole scene is just beautiful, isn't it? Ocarine just kind of sitting on the floor. He's got emails to send out, important emails, as he told Makise Kurisu, who is present. She's right there. But the visual storytelling of it communicates this idea of Ocarine just being isolated, already feeling so removed from all of these people, close friends and people he cares about. It's just the nature of it, right? It's not something Makise Kurisu can understand, or maybe she can. Maybe she can try to understand, right? But in their friendship or their really unique relationship, they haven't really quite crossed that bridge yet in terms of really opening up about these types of feelings, right? It always becomes like a joke, playing it off as a joke. But of course, I'm hoping for and expecting that sooner or later, they are going to have some emotionally resonant moments, right? That they are going to open up emotionally. But as of this point, isn't it crazy that she's right there behind him, but he feels so lonely in that moment, isolated. And you see how, again, the beautiful lighting, he's like, almost boxed in. So again, the visual storytelling and the storyboarding, all of it, backgrounds and the animation, key animation, all of that. It's top tier stuff, man. It really is top notch. And it's consistent, right? You'll remember back in episode 1, in my discussion, I mentioned, okay, I'm not sure if I can expect this quality for every episode, but, for the most part, I'd say more so than not, it's been rather consistent. Right? And again, the other aspects of it as well. The screenplay continues to be so engaging and fun. And even the score itself, I love the tonal shift present within the score, right? And it's perfectly showcasing the nature of this story, of this anime. And then, of course, the direction continues to be fantastic, and the voice acting. My God, I'm just enjoying this performance so much. And I'll come back to that. I kind of want to focus a little bit on the conclusion of this episode and the things that are at play now. So let's focus a bit on John Teeter's responses to Ocarine, right near the conclusion, because they confirm a lot of things for Ocarine, and then for me as an audience member as well. And it kind of throws up a few more question marks about John Teeter and my understanding of this John Teeter figure. Now, listen, I still believe there's a strong chance it could be Suzuha, but, now it is some of the things John Teeter had to say here, it's kind of opening up again. The possibility is opening up again of that possibly being someone else, right? Because, even earlier, there's a really cheeky moment. A moment that's really like on the nose once again, because you have Suzuha who's imploring Ocarine to go speak with John Teeter about these issues, these questions he might have. And you see she's got a cheeky smile on her face. And then, of course, if you already have that idea, that possibility, that speculation that, okay, maybe Suzuha is our John Teeter, this kind of adds another notch to that, doesn't it? It's rather cheeky in its approach. There's always these subtle moments, right? And it's a little bit too subtle for Ocarine to even pick up on, because again, to be fair to Ocarine, he's had a mindfuck moment again. And, right now he's kind of tackling, or at that moment rather, he's tackling the concept, the mind-bending concept of being the only one who appears to remember anything, right? And that's a constant. It's been a constant since episode 1. Now, again, there's a strong possibility there are multiple Ocarines in play in episode 1, but the Ocarine that sends out the initial D-mail, right? Someone stabbed Makise Kurisu, and then again he shifted into another timeline. That's the Ocarine I've been following, right? And now finally he shifted into a different timeline again, right? So he's experienced it twice. Once is an absolute mindfuck, and once is kind of like, okay, am I hallucinating? Am I all there? Am I imagining things? The thing is, Ocarine might have actually convinced himself that, yeah, he kind of imagined those things. Or even if he didn't convince himself, it's so bizarre, just the idea of it, the nature of it. He couldn't even begin to explain it to himself, let alone, share those thoughts. And again, that is a point that I do have, or a talking point rather. He still hasn't explained, but now again, he's shifted timelines again. But even before that, he still didn't explain. See, as I'm saying that, or as I'm thinking that, now that he has shifted another timeline or into another timeline and knows that, okay, this is a thing that's happening, something that John Teeter has also confirmed to him, and gone as far as to request that he becomes a savior figure because of his gift and a curse, like I said earlier. Maybe now he can begin to finally open up about his experiences, right? Maybe not with all of them at first. Maybe someone like Daru usually shuts those kind of things down, doesn't he? Mayuri. I mean, I suppose the immediate contender is Makise Kurisu, right? Again, Makise Kurisu is still in that room. Maybe there could be a continuation of that direct scene, and he finally opens up about some of these things, right? The one thing that he might be a little bit hesitant about is actually bringing up this idea of, listen, I saw your dead body. Or listen, again, you've got to be skeptical, because sure, it looked like a dead body, and yeah, it looked like she got stabbed, but do I know for sure? I believe one of my talking points there in episode 1 was that, okay, you can't rule out the possibility of a setup, guiding this Ocarine and all of that. But listen, there's a good chance that indeed, Makise Kurisu is dead on the floor there, right? So how do you even bring that up to Makise Kurisu now, especially now that, he knows he is experiencing something rather unique? I mean, so unique that he's the only one. But again, there's a lot of story ahead of me, a lot of episodes ahead of me. At some point, maybe there is a possibility there could be someone else. Even in this episode, you see that they are kind of hinting towards maybe another person, right? But this you have to be careful about, because this could easily be a misdirect as well, as it cuts to Moeka, right? Kiryu Moeka. And he's speaking, and this is as John Teeter is speaking of, it might be that you have that ability, right? Until now, no one has ever been known to maintain their memories across timelines or world lines, right? That he is exempt. He is this outlier. And again, she's the only one that they cut to in terms of, the ensemble cast. Other than that, it's just, mundane. Mundane, but it's beautiful. The shots themselves are beautiful, but it's people. It's just random people going about their days. And they don't show me anyone else. They don't show me Daru. They don't show me Makise or Makse. They don't show me Suzuha. They don't show me Mayuri and, so forth. Daru, none of those people. They only show me Kiryu Moeka. So, it is interesting. It is, given, the transitional hinge. But, you can't just immediately take it to the bank and just assume that, Kiryu Moeka is experiencing the same thing as Okarin. But even on that front, this idea of her taking photos, right? Mementos, proof. In her first appearance, she called it proof, right? Proof is it's a really specific term. Memento and proof are totally different things, right? Memento, she saw, she saw the relationship that Okarin and Makise have. It's really unique, and from the outside looking in, right? Even, beyond people that are a bit closer to Okarin, such as Mayuri and Daru, you see this is a third party that can already see that Makise and Okarin kind of have something going there, right? There's sparks. Right, the banter. It's a really specific type of banter, and you see Daru drop that term as well. And thankfully, I do know the meaning of that term, tsundere, right? So yeah, it's kind of like an open secret at this point. They all get it. They all see it, right? And Kiryu Moeka also sees it as well. It's kind of tough to miss at this point, and it's just charming, isn't it, to see it play out? But if you go back to her saying proof back in her first appearance, she ran into Okarin. I'm doing air quotes. She certainly took a photo of Okarin, again, by design, because again, it felt like she is looking for Okarin, right? Given the nature of the conversation that played out in her, taking a specific photo of Okarin and all of that. So proof, this idea of proof. Who's this proof for? Now, last episode, I am introduced to someone called FB, someone that is a bit of a constant for Kiryu Moeka, right? Someone that is actually quite helpful. Someone that Kiryu Moeka latches onto or has latched onto, right? So again, the nature of that, I don't know, can I even call it a relationship? I don't mean a romantic relationship, but that correspondence. Yeah, let's just say correspondence again. It's not one that is, I don't know, toxic or anything. She seems to be getting, she seems to really like talking to this person, right? Now, listen, of course, most things are pretty unknown about this FB person, right? So they could easily just be manipulating Kiryu Moeka, right? But just the idea of her saying proof, that, something about that, it kind of points towards, okay, she has to take these photos. She has to show that she's out here. She's making this effort, I suppose, to find the IBN 5100, and she tries to just straight up steal it, tries to just swipe it and sneak out, right? So they've got to keep an eye out on her. Okarin did the right thing. It's presented in a comedic manner, right? He asked both Mayuri and Makise to look after her, or keep an eye on her, rather, right? Yes, it's a fun moment. It's a fun scene. But, this idea of her really, really wanting the IBN 5100, yeah, like I said, everything that she needs and everything that she's taking photos of and documenting, at this point in time, I simply have to assume that she is sending all of this to this FB person. And the whole thing just makes me so uneasy, especially in this episode, because she finally actually spends time within the inner circle, within the lab itself. She gets a first-hand experience of the group dynamic, the friendship dynamic, and the different relationships within that dynamic, right? She understands it. She knows all of it. She's taking photos of Mayuri. She's taking photos of everyone. She's taking photos of just the lab itself internally, right? This is a bit much, man. It's really quite concerning. Again, not directly because of Moeka, but the idea that she is most likely, right, highly likely sending all of this, right, photos, information, all of that to someone. Again, that someone being this FB person. So, cause for concern. And, the reason I do bring up this idea of her getting an understanding for the group dynamics and, each person's role within that group, it's concerning because, again, given the unknowns about this FB person, you just don't know how things are going to play out in terms of how things could be manipulated, right? This idea of manipulation is actually something that I can toss around quite a bit. Listen, even John Teeter, you can look at John Teeter as a figure that has, his or her own motives, of course, but you can see an angle, or you can certainly speculate about an angle, where John Teeter might be kind of manipulating Okarin, right? Trying to guide him down a really specific path, right? The request has been made, right? That unthinkable request of being a savior. And again, all the baggage, the immense baggage that comes with that, Isn't it crazy that, since day one, Okarin's been just going on and on, the role playing and these delusions of grandeur, right? That's been really rather entertaining, of course, but all of this, right? All that big talk, all of these, scenarios that he cooks up in his mind, right? Mad scientist and all of that. But once something of that ilk actually happens, reality slaps him in the face, he's just shell-shocked. He is just completely baffled and afraid, rightfully so, of course, by this idea of, being asked to become a savior, to actually save the world from this certain dystopia. And the only way to do it is apparently to guide the world beyond 1% divergence. Beyond 1% divergence is kind of insane, right? It might be a low number, but in the grand scheme of things, that's actually kind of insane, right? Again, just look at it. It requires something like 1% divergence to completely kind of bypass this certain dystopia, this dystopian future that John Teeter speaks of, right? Again, a dystopian future that sounds rather, similar or familiar to the one that Suzuha most likely came from, right? Again, you see here, prime example. Again, it's not subtle because I don't think it's trying to be subtle. Once again, she's speaking of, are you chipped? She's actually legitimately checking, right? So that's a thing. That's a thing that exists in the future. Dystopian future, clearly, the one that she comes from, right? Air raids and, potentially being chipped and brainwashed, controlled, all these kind of things that she's thinking of. And again, there's a couple of other things that are a dead giveaway in terms of her actually being from the future, right? But again, I like it. I like this approach as well because, piece by piece, it is kind of painting a picture of this future and the things that exist in this future, again, day to day. Right, things like air raids and being chipped, death reports and all of that, right? So it's a good approach. I like it. It's a clever approach in that sense. But, on another side of it, or from another angle, it's not subtle as far as, is Suzuha from the future? It's not. Because, again, I believe that it's not trying to be subtle anymore, if at all, even since the beginning, right? And also that kind of reminds me of the point I was trying to make a little bit earlier, I think. There's always so many thoughts in my mind, and sometimes it kind of becomes a little bit difficult to remember if I already mentioned that or if I touched up on it or not. But, just a little simple moment. Again, this moment is actually kind of subtle, but again, subtle because Okarin has a lot on his mind at the moment, right? So she said, essentially, it becomes clear. It's an understanding between the two that, okay, Suzuha knows that, time travel is taking place, or a form of time travel, rather, is taking place. She's overheard, and yeah, all of that, right? And at one point, during that conversation, she said, "Good job," right? Smile on her face, "Good job." That is not the reaction of someone who's finding out about time travel for the first time, or the possibility of time travel for the first time. Right, you look at Kiryu Moeka's reaction once it is confirmed that, the test D-mail in the beginning before the cold open is actually successful, you see that close-up of her eyes. Yeah? Yeah. That's not the reaction of Suzuha. But the thing is, I'm not speaking from my perspective. I'm speaking from Okarin's perspective. He's so caught up in the things that are taking place at the moment, understandably so, that he doesn't even kind of clock that. Okay, her reaction isn't much of a reaction at all. She just kind of accepted it, and she's got a smile on her face, right? So again, it's one of those moments of Okarin kind of overlooking some of these things, right? Missing some of these things, as clever as he is at times. But speaking of Suzuha and this possibility of her potentially being John Teeter, things got a little bit interesting here, didn't they? Because, episodes ago at this point, right? Around the time John Teeter is first introduced as this, new person on the scene, essentially, right? In the first couple of episodes of the series. On that message board. So at one point, John Teeter responds to Okarin, right? And again, this is right in the open on that message board. So others saw it as well, right? Listen, it just occurred to me. It's entirely possible that this FB person might have been snooping in that message board as well, right? It's open to anyone and everyone, right? Unless it's one of those things that, only like hacker types or, people that are into these things kind of have to, go through a few loops to get to, right? I don't know the nature of the message board itself, but yeah, someone like FB, this really mysterious new figure, ominous figure that's been introduced through Kiryu Moeka, yeah, it's possible, entirely possible that, they're snooping around, lingering there as well, right? To keep tabs, to keep an eye on things, perhaps. Because again, I almost immediately connected the IBN 5100 to this FB person through Moeka in the last episode's discussion, because of just the nature of the whole thing, relationship, right? If you can call it that, correspondence. But ultimately, she is doing things, right? Again, proof. This is for proof, taking photos for proof and all of that. And again, you just have to assume she's sending everything back to this FB person. But, I digress. Let's get back to this. So John Teeter straight up just responds to Okarin and tells him, it's possible that you saw me in a different world line. So from that, I just immediately assumed, I didn't even just speculate, I just assumed, okay, this John Teeter knows that there is a person out there, or just the idea of it is a thing. Or at that point, I just assumed that John Teeter understands that this person, Okarin, is able to, retain memories and is immune or exempt from the memory reconstruction aspect of it, right? And at that point, it made it sound like, okay, it's not just something that's only unique to Okarin, right? That there could be others out there, just a couple of others maybe, or even just one more at most. But maybe there are others out there, and that's the reason I thought that John Teeter is even saying this. So as you'll remember, my assumption from that point is, okay, whoever John Teeter ends up being, even if it is Suzuha, they know that this is a thing, right? Maintaining your memories and all of that. But then here, in the conclusion, John Teeter is straight up telling Okarin that, no one's ever been known to maintain their memories, through this jump, this transfer to a different timeline, right? You might be the one that has that ability, right? Or it might be that you have that ability. The one person who can guide the world and all of that. So here, John Teeter is straight up confirming that no one's known to have that ability. And then, of course, one of the really unique aspects of that ability, I suppose, I never actually looked at it as an ability, but, John Teeter is describing it as an ability. I've always kind of looked at it as, something, I've been calling him an outlier. I guess up until this point, I'm kind of looking at it as, a condition or something unique about Okarin that allows for this. And of course, I'm certainly hoping for some kind of insight, some kind of explanation for this, right? And, how exactly Okarin is this outlier? Why exactly is he exempt? So of course, I'm hoping for that at some point. So yeah, it's strange, isn't it? It's interesting, to say the least, I suppose, that on one end, John Teeter is saying openly in a message board, responding to Teeter, sorry, not to Teeter, he's not responding to himself. But, here's the thing, that's another possibility, maybe a slim one. But yeah, you can never rule out the possibility that John Teeter could be another Okarin, that's guiding himself. I do like the idea of that, right? But the thing is, as far as characters that I know that could be John Titor, the prime candidate is Suzuha. Again, episode by episode, that just becomes stronger and stronger, that possibility. But even on that front, you kind of have to begin thinking about Okarin's future, right? His role in this timeline that leads to the dystopian future, and him in this dystopian future, right? I've heard about Makise Kurisu, right? Her trajectory, her path, again, through Suzuha and her disdain for Makise Kurisu, right? Shooting daggers at her any chance she gets. So I know, Makise Kurisu is kind of around and has a role to play, right? But that's about it. I don't know anything about Daru. I don't know anything about Okarin's role in all of this. Again, the years leading up to this dystopian future, and then being a part of that dystopian future, living in that dystopian future day to day and struggling and all of that. So, as of this point, the strongest indicator of corporeal time travel, physical time travel that is, it's Suzuha, Amane Suzuha, right? And ultimately, I do believe that is the time travel machine, right? The one that they refer to as a satellite and all of that, lodged into the side of the radio building still. Untouchable, essentially, for many, diplomatic reasons, I suppose. Meaning that at some point, of course, they figure that out, right? They crack it. They crack corporeal time travel. Hell, listen, is it possible that Suzuha could be, one of the last, remaining members of the Future Gadgets Lab? This is it. And then, maybe if I get, if I do get a bit of backstory about Suzuha, maybe I'll learn a bit more. Hell, maybe Future Gadgets Lab is still a thing from her dystopian future, but more of like an underground thing, kind of like a, Suzuha is always giving resistance, right? A resistance force against CERN and this, stranglehold they have on society and the world, essentially, right? This dystopian future and all of that. And, this stranglehold that they do have on time travel. Yet, again, Suzuha is a time traveler. But, going back to my initial point about Okarin, an Okarin that is present within just a specific timeline. I'm not speaking of the Okarin that is jumping from timeline to timeline, the one I know since day one, right? The one that's just retaining all of his memories. Listen, that's just one angle. There's almost kind of like a cosmic horror aspect to it as well, right? Look at it from another perspective. Look at it from the perspective of the Okarin that gets overridden, the one that disappears, the one that ceases to exist, right? Because our Okarin takes over that body, takes over that mind, and brings in his own experiences and memories that he keeps carrying from timeline to timeline now, two times at least at this point, right? So that's kind of dark, isn't it? That Okarin, the one in each specific timeline, just ceases to exist. And this idea of looking at it from a different angle, a thing I would really love to see is an outside perspective, right? All of these things are happening from Okarin's perspective, right? The time jump aspect of it. Or jumping to a different timeline aspect of it, right? In this one, it's an exciting moment, man. You saw how excited I got to finally see it happen again. But you see that, it's kind of like him in a daze at first, just out of the whole thing, out of it. Again, understandably so. So much so that, he's just kind of limping out into the street and looking really quite disheveled and just out of it, to the point that, the idea, the possibility of him actually being brainwashed is something that is a real concern for Suzuha at that point, right? Because he looks it. Though he's almost about to say, maybe that's the case, or maybe everyone else is brainwashed. Something like that, right? He's about to say it and it gets cut off by Suzuha, who just tosses him onto the bench right beside Nai rather, yeah. Cute kid. But yeah, back to my point about looking at it from a different perspective. I need to see that. I hope to see it from just anyone else's perspective. I'd say a prime candidate is probably Mayuri, because again, it's Mayuri. Mayuri's that constant, the one that snaps him out of it. She pulls him out of that daze, right? Upon jumping into a different timeline, right? Again, she doesn't know that she's doing that for him, but that's a constant. It's been there, or this aspect of it has been there since episode 1. I mean, that's one of the biggest talking points of episode 1. Mayuri just being in the right place at the right time, pulling Okirin back into it, snapping him out of it, right? Grounding him, being that constant. And that continues. It does. But it could be really interesting to see, that moment it happens, an Okirin getting taken over by our Okirin. But looking at it from the outside, from another person's perspective. Because even in this episode, once he does make the jump, the shift into this timeline, he asked, how long have I been standing here? Mayuri said something like 30 seconds, right? And I suppose half of that is Okirin saying, haha, or, something happened. See, maybe you could clear this up in the comments. I'm not sure, if that's haha as in like laughing, or a breakthrough moment. He thought of something and he goes to the contraption, or is it kind of him beginning to feel something, right? As in I don't know, right? Sometimes it can be kind of lost in translation, right? The true meaning of what the character's trying to say in Japanese. So is that possible that for the first 15 seconds of that, it's actually an Okirin, this Okirin that does not exist anymore, beginning to feel this thing, this phenomenon of being taken over, being hijacked, the mind being hijacked by our Okirin. And then of course, the other 15 seconds being our Okirin coming to, again in a daze, and then slowly Mayuri kind of pulling him out of it, right? Even the sound design there, the sound design continues to be top notch in all aspects of it. But even there, this feeling you get, this idea of Mayuri's voice functioning as this rope in the dark, functioning as a rope in the maze to help Okirin out. That's how I kind of see it or perceive it. But like I said in the beginning of this discussion, it's a slippery slope, man. And sooner or later, he's going to find himself in a free fall, right? And who knows how long he'll be in a free fall, man. Things are going to get really crazy for him at some point. They simply are, right? It's an exciting thought, but a really, really scary thought as well, to see how much this could escalate. Because as this plays out, and you have to assume it's going to be more and more D-males, right? He's going to get further and further away from base level for our Okirin, this Okirin that's jumped twice now, right? Since episode 1, right? After sending the Makise Kurisu being stabbed message, D-mail. So at some point he's going to find himself so detached from everything and reality and the people that he's around that they're going to begin to feel foreign to him. But see, here's kind of like a heartbreaking thought. Imagine down the line, as a hypothetical, and, a lot of crazy changes have happened, but, he's still around Mayuri and Daru and Makise and all of that. The heartbreaking thought here is that, okay, no matter how many times he jumps, it's still just, it's life, it's reality for the people in that timeline, right? Mayuri, for example, again, because, she is someone that cares a lot about Okirin. Imagine at some point her Okirin being hijacked essentially, and it being our Okirin, but that Okirin just not feeling like he has a connection to that Mayuri because it's not his Mayuri. That's the thing that's really kind of heartbreaking just to even think about. But you have to look at it from that Mayuri's perspective. She's just going to be just quite confused and upset and sad, heartbroken even. The possibility of that is there, right? And that applies to, it could even apply to someone like Daru, right? But it could certainly apply to people like Makise Kurisu as well. But yeah, there's a lot to think about here, because it's not just Okirin that's going to be affected, right? He's going through it, and he's going through some serious shit, right? But how about the other people in each one of those timelines, right? Those are real people. Those people are living their lives. Now, again, at a base level, Mayuri is Mayuri. I don't think Okirin's ever going to treat her in a manner that is just, unacceptable. But, this idea of maybe him understanding this isn't And listen, this is like looking really down the line, perhaps, once he's really kind of put through the grinder, essentially, right? Put through his paces over and over again, kind of jumping and jumping and jumping. Maybe at that point, he might, at some point, shortly, he's going to feel, okay, I need to somehow get back, right? I need to get back to my base level, my reality. Right? So at some point, it is a possibility that he might not look at all these people as his actual, versions of, Mayuri or Makisekurisu or Daru, right? But again, that's just me assuming that friendship doesn't change, because at some point, maybe, once things get kind of crazy, really crazy, there could be some changes in the relationships as well, perhaps. Because like I said a little bit earlier, I am kind of preparing myself, bracing myself for some kind of significant divergence at some point, right? That's the type that might really truly break your mind. It's going to happen at some point, and that's around the time Ocarine is probably going to really struggle or begin to struggle, and then realize, okay, I'm just getting further and further away from my own reality, right? And at that point, during this free fall, the slippery slope, he's going to think about, okay, how do I get back to that? And just naturally, the further he gets away from that, from his base level, there's going to be that strong inclination to somehow overturn everything, somehow get back to that base level, right? If that's a thing. Now, there's a really unique aspect of this, the story's time travel mechanics, right? The jumping to different timelines, the world lines, right? So, yeah, see, there is that opening, right? It's really clever. I really like this, their take on time travel. Now, it's not the first time I've seen, it's unique, but it's not the first time I've seen this type of time travel. Like I mentioned, I mentioned Lost and Desmond Hume. Even if you look at something like Days of Future Past, I believe that's the best X-Men film, like just ever. There's a few good ones. Most of them are kind of slop. Even if they are slop, some of them are good fun. But, there's a few that really stand out. You think of Logan. You think of, again, Days of Future Past, right? That's full on comic book. But it also has such a nice balance of, emotional depth and intrigue. And again, time travel mechanics. So I ate that up, of course. But, there you've got Logan, who does time travel, but it's a really specific type of time travel, not corporeal time travel. It's not physical time travel. It's his consciousness that time travels to a different point in time, or a different point in his own timeline, to a younger self, essentially, right? So something similar is happening here as well. It's Okarine's consciousness jumping from Ocarine to Ocarine in different timelines. So, this idea of possibly, pulling yourself out of that pit, pulling yourself out of that, darkness, that free fall, it is a possibility. The opening is there, right? Because again, you can jump from timeline to timeline. But again, the key component of that is how exactly do you go about jumping from timeline to timeline? Right? Because, some messages don't really trigger anything. They don't change anything, right? In the grand scheme of things. But then there's other messages like the one in this one, lotto numbers, that are substantial enough to change timelines. I mean, ultimately, they didn't actually end up, winning the lotto because of the one number, right? The one error that Ruka ends up making. Now, even that, even if you look at that, is that just a simple case of Ruka overthinking it? Because, Ruka seems to have a bit of a crush on Ocarine, and Ocarine has asked Ruka to use these numbers to go purchase the lotto ticket. And then, of course, you have to think about, the reasoning for that. How come Ocarine didn't just do it himself? It's entirely possible that Ocarine legitimately just didn't have the money to buy that lotto ticket. So he asked Ruka to do it, right? But if you want to look at it from another exciting angle, maybe a bit more unlikely in this case, you look at it as a universe as a whole, or time as a whole, not allowing that to happen, right? Keeping certain things in check, right? Not allowing too much of a massive change or shift. But again, that also kind of falls apart because I am expecting massive changes and divergences at some point, And, speaking of divergence and divergence numbers and, this idea of guiding beyond or guiding the world beyond 1% divergence or beyond it lies true freedom, right? That whole thing of it. So these numbers, right? Episodes ago at this point, and again, Ocarine brings it up again, John Titor pointed out changing the divergence number, right? I'm pretty certain at this point that, these little flashes I get, these have to be the divergence numbers. So now that I've seen these numbers twice, right? Now, it flashes a bunch of numbers, but then it kind of lands on one number as the last frame, right? And this is, Ocarine experiencing that shift, that thing that happens to him, right? And, I'm also thinking about the actual process of it. Is it painful, right? I mean, it certainly feels strange. I mean, at the least, it must feel incredibly off and just, I don't know. Maybe a part of him feels a little bit nauseous, right? Again, you see that he looks quite disheveled and out of it for a bit as he comes across Suzuha. But yeah, so I did go back to episode 1. The last number that's actually displayed on the screen before it cuts to Ocarine kind of, coming to, it's 0.571024, right? So that's about, again, half, right? Half of that 1% magic number that John Titor brings up here, beyond 1% rather. And then here, the last number it lands on is 0.571015. So from 1024 to 1015, it's not the biggest shift in those numbers there, right? Just a slight change. But then, yeah, look at that. Now, imagine the amount of change that's required, or divergence rather, that's required to get to 1%. That's quite a bit, isn't it? Quite a bit. And, the really cool thing is, these different numbers that flash before it lands on, the final number, I saw stuff like 1%, 1.2%, 1.6, 1.8, right? That's back in episode 1. So is that just kind of flashing all these different timelines? And then it ultimately lands on the actual timeline. And again, it ended up being 0.57 and so on. So yeah, there's so many cool things happening here, right? The mechanics of it, just the anime as a whole, man. I'm really rather dialed in, if you couldn't tell already. Yeah, it's exciting stuff, man, and exciting times ahead for the rest of the series as well, of course. But I do kind of need to go all the way back to finish up a point, right, about this idea of Suzuha possibly being Titor, or, the Titor from the message board telling, Ocarine that he might have seen him in another timeline, just openly, just really casually. And then here is saying that, oh, no one's been known to do this before. Yeah, there's something interesting going on there, right? I mean, listen, that's just assuming that John Titor is being just truthful about all of this. This could just be, again, a bit of an act, or a really select approach, telling Ocarine the things they feel that Ocarine needs to hear, or guiding Ocarine down a really specific path. But yeah, let's see. I mean, this is the most significant conversation that's taking place between John Titor and Ocarine. So, if you kind of stay on that train of thought that Suzuha could be John Titor, it becomes really quite exciting the next time I get to see Suzuha and Ocarine kind of, come together. Again, from an audience member's perspective, because, Ocarine has no clue. He doesn't even realize that she's a time traveler. So if she is John Titor, and she's made that request now officially, right, be our savior and guide the world and all of that, now that, John Titor, or possibly Suzuha, knows for sure that Ocarine has experienced this, right? And it's happened once before as well, so it's happened twice. So it is a thing that's happening to Ocarine. And, even Ocarine finally kind of accepted it, that it is something that's happening to him only, right? That the first time, yeah, let me finish up that point from really early on. First time, yeah, he almost kind of convinced himself, yeah, let me just kind of forget about that and just bury that down deep. I don't need to bring that up and talk about it. Now it happened again. The second time it happens, it's like, okay, this is a thing. First time it's like, okay, the fuck? Yeah. But now it's like, okay, this is a thing. This is an actual thing that's happening just to me, right? And again, you see his reaction to them just being completely oblivious or clueless. Again, from Okarine's perspective, in terms of, the whole test. Operation Urd, sending, the lotto numbers because the people or his friends and colleagues in this timeline, they didn't get to that point of sending the lotto numbers. They're almost about to get to that point, right? They're thinking of ideas. So, isn't that interesting that this Ocarina, our Ocarina, got sent back to a pretty close counterpart in a different timeline right before that happened. But yeah, also quickly in terms of, the butterfly effect and some of the changes that are now taking place. Of course, you see, the Dr. Pepper does end up being on the table in this timeline, right? So of course, a few things got shifted around to the point that, they are able to get a Dr. Pepper for Ocarina, or, Makise did end up getting a Dr. Pepper because in this timeline, stuff that ends up happening because of, again, the butterfly effect means that ultimately there is at least one Dr. Pepper around that, she can grab for Ocarina. Because he requested it, of course, or, that's his drink of choice, or the choice drink, rather. Butterfly effect, it's a hell of a thing, man. But see, here's the really exciting yet also scary aspect of this. You're not immediately always going to know about the changes. They're not just going to be right then and there in your face, in the room that you find yourself in, right? Or any place you find yourself in. Sometimes, who knows, it could take days, maybe months or years before you actually come across a really specific change. But the thing is, I doubt our Ocarina is going to be spending much time in any specific timeline as far as, more than... I can't see him spending a year in any new timeline that he shifts into. Now that things are really moving on that front in terms of D-Mills changing timelines, or being significant enough to change timelines. So yeah, even as an audience member, it's kind of fun or even exciting to be a bit more attentive, right? I mean, I'm already doing that, but now I'm always going to be on the lookout for, let's see. Does anything else feel different? Does anything seem like, okay, this is odd? Just the thought of that it is kind of fun. It's exciting, but again, at the same time, it's scary as well. Imagine, again, long-term thinking. Imagine just the horror of that. Everything you knew, or bit by bit, again, your base level, I suppose, just keeps changing. Things that you knew for years, then all of a sudden just being totally different, or just becoming something else, or just not existing altogether. Right? That's the type of thing I'm thinking about as I speak of slippery slopes and, ending up in a free fall, right? That could, mentally, that's going to do a number on Ocarina at some point. But also quickly, as I am, on the topic of being in the lab, in that room, Kiryu Moika's reaction in the beginning of the episode again, right before the cold open, her actually getting confirmation and seeing it with her own eyes that indeed the D-Mill did go back, right? It was sent to the past. Her reaction dictates or showcases or shows me that, okay, this is the first time she's experiencing something like this. Maybe she's been told about it. Maybe she knows about it. Again, that's kind of up in the air at the moment. But, her reaction is definitive. This is the first time she's experiencing something like this. So that, that possibility of her also being a time traveler, and then, them actually, even trying to be cheeky about it and hinting at her maybe being another person that's able to actually retain memories, and being exempt from the whole, memory reconstruction aspect of it from timeline to timeline. Yeah, it's like, it's a bit of both. It could be a bit of both, right? But yeah, it appears that it is her first time as well seeing something like this. But, speaking of lab members or labo member, surely Ocarina is going to ask Suzuha to become a lab member at some point, right? I hope so. And it feels like it is heading into that direction, because especially... at this point, you can see, I already felt, my feelings on this, that, Suzuha feels like someone that is kind of like on Ocarina's side, right? I don't feel any danger. I don't feel uneasy anytime, she's around Ocarina or is speaking of certain things, and the fact that she is essentially pretty much a time traveler, I just don't feel at all that, there's any danger associated with Suzuha being around Ocarina. You see, by the end of this, or not by the end of this episode, by the end of that scene, she tells him straight up, I'm rooting for you, big smile on her face. She's always looking out for him. So at this point, I'm sure Ocarina is understanding that, okay, this is someone that is a friend, that can be a friend, right? That is on my side, that is trying to help. But again, to get to that point, it's going to require some kind of unique situation, right? Because Okarin isn't just going to randomly ask her to be a lab member, right? All of the lab members, the recent ones at least, you know, it's been because of really specific situations. You know, you look at Makise, then you look at Kiryu Moeka, right? So it's going to require some kind of incident or situation that's going to basically require Okarin to say, you know, okay, you have to become a lab member, right? Let's see if that happens, and if it happens, how exactly that plays out. But yeah, you know, to finish up on, you know, that whole Suzuha and Okarin thing, or that aspect of it, yeah, the next time they get to meet each other, it'll be interesting to see how Suzuha reacts around Okarin, right? If indeed Suzuha is John Teeter and she has actually asked Okarin to be the savior and all of that. Because ultimately, if Suzuha does end up being John Teeter, you would have to assume that at some point she is going to just have to tell Okarin, right? Again, once things get really kind of serious. But before I move on to a different point, going back to the lab and Moeka's time in the lab, yes, you know, I spoke of her getting this understanding for the group dynamics and the friendship dynamics and the, you know, relationships within that ensemble cast. If you look at it from her perspective, in, you know, in some of these moments, you can see, you know, this is good for her, right? It's a nice, unique experience for her being around a lot of these people. She said she had a fun time, and then of course, you know, you see Mayuri actually really kind of took care of her. You know, there's that moment as Mayuri puts her hand on Moeka's hand, right, to reassure her, you know, to let her know, you know, it's okay, you're with friends now. And, you know, you get a lot of tight shots of Moeka's expressions, her eyes, as Mayuri is kind of, you know, showing her around. She takes photos of Mayuri as well. And then, of course, you know, speaking of Moeka sending that text, that message, you know, saying that she had a fun time and all of that. And, you know, please tell me more about the time machine next time. Promise and all of that. I love that scene as well. You know, one by one, all of them kind of get in contact with Okarin, right? Checking in. Even Daru saying that, you know, he forgot his wallet. I mean, you know, I'm sure part of him still kind of wants to just talk to Okarin, you know, kind of just check in on him, and, you know, maybe through that conversation kind of gauge, okay, how's he feeling now, right? Then of course, you know, Mayuri, just, you see his, I mean, even before Mayuri, you know, you've got Ruka, right? Ruka is, you know, quite upset, you know, with himself, that, you know, he kind of messed it up and all of that, but he doesn't need to be all that upset. You know, you see Okarin, there's a big smile on Okarin's face as well after getting that message, you know, Ruka apologizing again. And then of course Mayuri, you know, she calls, and, you know, not just Okarin, I light up as well, right? But you see that Makise notices, you know, that Okarin is just, you know, smiling once again. She points it out, and he shoots daggers at her, but then even that moment, you see it's a really wholesome, charming moment. He smiles because of that as well, right? He understands that, you know, Makise is a friend, and perhaps, you know, a little bit more than friend, or could be a little bit more than a friend as well, right? That there is, at the least, there is this really fun and, you know, wholesome connection that's formed. You know, a couple of episodes ago, I had a segment about, you know, the ethics of time travel, and, you know, just the different connotations of it, and different types of time travel rather. And, you know, this idea of, okay, you would have to be in a position to actually observe different, you know, timelines branching off and all of that, to be able to actually tell the differences or see how things turn out, right? That's exactly the thing Okarin is able to do, or in a position to do, right? And John Teeter points that out, to maintain your memories across timelines and observe the changes. That's the exact verbiage I used in that segment a couple of episodes ago. And this kind of brings me back to this idea of it being a gift and a curse, right? That's a lot of, I don't know, man, a lot of power, I suppose. That's a lot of input, right? Because he, again, as far as the story has told me, he's the only one in this position, in this really unique position, only one that has this exemption, right? Of remembering, being able to observe from timeline to timeline. Yeah, I mean, you know, on one end, yeah, you look at it as a savior. But, you know, if you, again, look at a few of the other angles branching off, the idea, the possibility of a God complex forming at some point, you know, that's always a possibility. You know, that concept, that idea of one bad day, just, you know, completely losing control and just being fed up and all of that. being afraid to lose the things that you cherish most, right? Losing his grasp on his reality, his base level, and all of that. And again, in the same discussion a couple of episodes ago, about time travel ethics and all of that, and the mechanics of it all, this idea of just, saying the hell with it, right? Once it becomes too personal, right? Now, if you tie that into Okurin's position and his eventual position, is Okurin going to find himself going down a path, where he begins to feel justified in his actions and push it as far as he's able to push it beyond ethical boundaries and all of that, right? I can see that happening. I think that is a strong possibility because that is a thing that happens quite often in time travel narratives, right? Again, to hell with all the rules. So yeah, even that idea of it is a slippery slope, right? This label of savior, this idea of him having a lot of say on things. But quickly jumping back to Suzuha, I've got a few more quick talking points about Suzuha. Now, I mentioned Days of the Future Past a little bit earlier, right? Logan, and again, that type, the time travel he experiences. If Suzuha ends up being John Titor, or even just looking at John Titor, the task there is actually rather similar to John Titor's, isn't it? Logan is actually sent back. His consciousness specifically is sent back to prevent a dystopian future, right? So, there's some similarities there for sure. Now, of course, for those who don't know, Days of the Future Past is this iconic and classic story in X-Men comics, from the X-Men comics. And also another point about Suzuha, and it kind of comes out of quite a comedic scene, right? As Mr. Braun shows up again, and Nai and Okurin essentially give her up and accidentally just kind of out her for slacking off and all of that. And then there's that line, oh, the 42-incher is still in pieces, meaning she's meant to be fixing it, putting it back together, or just get it working again, essentially. It makes you think, doesn't it? Okay, since day one, they've shown us that, okay, she's clearly not from around this time. She doesn't quite understand things that are, normal and all of that, right? Yet, apparently she seems to be not an expert, but she knows enough about CRTs to, again, get hired. Now, again, it's quite a comedic scene back around the time she does get hired in episode 2, right? For the love of the CRTs, but you could easily just say, oh, she's just, faking it, making that up and all of that. But if she was making it up, the guy, Mr. Braun, he would have understood. He would have seen her immediately, right? Or he would have immediately figured out that, okay, she was just bullshitting about, loving CRTs. And again, if you love CRTs, you just assume that the functionality and all of that, right? So it's interesting, isn't it? Someone like Suzuha, who's just, again, I firmly believe is from the future. I mean, no, not firmly believe. She is from the future. Has this kind of understanding for CRTs of all things, And again, that idea of getting employed right under the lab itself, right? Future Gadgets Lab. That's again, by design. But yeah, I don't know, man. Is there even a possibility that she was actually given training about CRTs so she could, again, go back to this point in time and actually know enough about CRTs to get employed there by this Mr. Braun, who actually, for once, apparently seems to have a customer because he's on a house call, according to Suzuha. So, okay, finally, some signs of customers. But another aspect of this episode that I simply have to point out is the humor. My God, this is actually legitimately funny stuff to me. Again, a lot of times it can be a preference thing, but, for me, this is some funny stuff, man. Again, the voice acting performances, Okurin's voice acting specifically, my goodness. I mean, this is simply one of the best performances I've experienced in anime. It simply is. Just the range, and just, the balance of serious and just goofy and funny. I mean, there's just so much personality in this voice acting performance. That it's just tremendous, man. It really is quite tremendous. And of course, all the other performances as well, Mayuri, Daru as well, Makise and Moika, all of them, everything feels just perfect for each character. And the screenplay, again, it comes into the spotlight as well, right? Because it feels so authentic, the type of banter or the back and forth, it's really quick response times. That's why it feels authentic, right? And that's why they end up kind of speaking over each other at times. But yeah, the banter just continues to be immaculate. It's a lot of fun stuff, really engaging. As you can see, man, I'm having such a blast, right? It's just the perfect balance of it, isn't it? But yeah, I think, folks, that should do it for this one. But yeah, if you did enjoy that, consider dropping a like, consider dropping some comments, give me your thoughts. If you are interested in early access, full opacity, or timer-based full length to multiple episodes right at this moment, consider checking out the Patreon page and potentially supporting the channel as well in the process of it all. The links are in the description and the pinned comment, also links to social media. Right then, thank you so much for joining me, folks, and thank you for your time, because time is precious. It really is. And I do hope to see you again soon for episode 8. Until then, take it easy.